global, multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-technic shamanism.
Synchro-mystic.
Transformation of consciousness.
Such an incredible connection to this medicine and this culture.
Mystical.
That we can form a larger community that can make the invisible visible.
We're going to come into new expressions of
Where did psychedelics come from?
The sacred mirrors were based on a psychedelic experience.
Thank you, Palenque Norte.
Welcome to Palenque Norte. I'm very excited right now. I've been looking forward to this talk for a few months now, and we get to hear a second talk, actually, because Bob Forte unfortunately could not make it to Burning Man this year. So Bruce is graciously stepping in for him. So Bruce Damer is a polymathic sci-tech guy whose work runs the gamut from big questions in science to the future of human civilization to tending an organic farm garden. He designs and leads projects in many areas, including the origin of life, and that's the EVA Grid and Genesis engines, space exploration, with the NASA mission virtualization, and the origins and impact of the digital lifestyle with this Digibarn Computer Museum. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Bruce Damer. Thank you.
Thank you, Pez. You're going to get an impromptu synesthetic talk today because this is unplanned, which are always the best. Terence McKenna used to just love to just be in an unprompted. He hated sitting on stages and having to come up with scripts and things. And as soon as he could throw that over his shoulder, sit on the edge of the stage and just rap and do Q&A, he was good. You know, he was relaxed and rested. If you listen to, how many listen to Terence McKenna on the, how many are Psychedelic Salon listeners as well? Wow, it's a goodly proportion. Well, I want to give you, it's just something the three of us were talking about when we started. I do some kind of a practice. It's sort of a kind of global, multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-technic shamanism. And I've been doing this for about 25 years. And what that is what I call put yourself on the shelf. Get the idea? Yourself is parked on the shelf, and then you dive into another world. And for me, this has been these delightful worlds of Pentagon think tanks, NASA mission design, where you wear, in the Pentagon think tanks, you wear a certain garb. If you're not uniformed in active duty military, you kind of tone down because active duty are wearing their active duty. Although if some of these places they don't have to, so everybody's relaxed. At NASA, you always wear like logo shirts, Johnson Space Center, Ames Research Center, and you speak in a certain way. You use certain use certain acronyms. So you have to load a whole cultural operating system. But it's a thrill to go into these worlds, shut your mouth, put yourself on the shelf, listen and learn these people's reality. And I've become good at it so that now it only takes me a few weeks to get up, figure out who the personalities are, the hot issues, what the key lock words are. And lock words are, I'll give you an example of this. You'd never believe this, but in NASA, the word flaky is a really powerful word, flaky. And they describe Buzz Aldrin as flaky because he has all these wild ideas of how to go to Mars and stuff. And so I researched this. What does flaky mean? And it's engineers. You know, there's a great Dilbert cartoon which shows a mother bringing her son to the doctor's waiting room, and then her son is just sitting there, and he looks like a little Dilbert with glasses, and then the mother comes in, and the doctor says, I'm sorry to inform you, madam, but your son is an engineer. And then she's bursting out in tears, you know, so that's, but the NASA world, I'll tell you, that was a hard world to get into because they have flaky radar. So you have to speak their speak. You have to. They do everything in increments, like it's called TRL, Technology Readiness Level, and everyone's marching up. Like, will my camera fly on the next Mars observer? Well, if it's Technology Readiness Level, and there's all these queues and all these proposals and projects you have to, and this incredible marching. It's almost like a religious order, and so learning that world, then you get access to the gold of that world. And the gold of that world is that these people do amazing things. They do, in a sense, psychedelic things. I mean, if you look at the Curiosity landing, there's never been a ballsier thing done. Do you see the animation of that, how that came down? You know, half of us sitting around at NASA Ames Research Center in the lab, you know, we were like, knock on our heads, this thing has a 50-50 chance of, you know, basically Mars Odyssey. It was like I told Mike Sims, call up Mars Odyssey and have them look for the crash site, you know, the wreckage of this thing, because they lowered the thing on a halter at the last minute from this rocket bedstead, and then they had to release the rover and was on the ground and get the rocket bedstead the heck out of the way. And Mike showed us the crash site for that, and it was like stuff had been scattered hundreds of feet when that hit the Martian surface. These people do astounding things. They're going to launch a telescope that is half a football field in length. It's like if you go to Sacred Spaces Village and you see the beautiful strung fabric roofs there, and you see them a lot of new tents. Well, they have 7 strung fabric blockers on the bottom of this thing and a full-on freaking telescope sitting on top. Those 7 layers are to block the Earth's, all the crap radiation noise from the Earth, and they're going to send it way the heck out, and it's going to look to the beginning of the universe. It's going to look to where the universe turned on. And you guys talk about turning on. Well, the universe turned on when electrons, which are separated from nuclei, started to orbit and started to say, hey, we'll get together, you know, electrons and nuclei, and then light could be possible. Light was possible at that point, and the universe turned on. And they're actually going to try to see back to that point when the universe was ionized, and you could have light, because before that there was no photons flying around. Can you imagine any more? I mean, that's alchemical gold right there, but it's couched in really tough engineering, really rigorous anti-flaky, anti-woo-woo engineering, because in the end there's some incredibly tough system has to work. These are objective people. We can sit around and talk about, wouldn't it be nice if such and such did it? Well, for them, they have to test and test and test and test, because if it doesn't do it, 25-year careers go up in smoke, and $5 billion in budget. And these people have worked all their lives to see this happen. So you can imagine their culture. But it's useful to know their culture, because if you come out of the NASA world and you come into another world, you say, you know what? These guys can deliver. They deliver some of the toughest things. You could apply that to another community. So stepping on in the shaman's journey, the Pentagon world, and I'll get into that a little bit later, that's a whole reality. But I now frequently go to Pakistan. Why? Because a company that I co-founded in the 80s set up a lab in Pakistan with 200 people. And this lab sits right across from the parliament on Constitution Avenue in Islamabad, Pakistan. And so that world is another trippy world, because it's a combination of really super high tech. It's Twitter Muslims who are devout. I mean, these guys don't drink, they don't smoke. Their parents are, you know, old British, so they are knocking back whiskeys. But these Twitter Muslims, long beards, the Friday prayers. When I go into the office this Friday, I wear the finest shower kameez. You know, everyone wears their finest on Friday. I don't go to prayers, but I love that tradition of dressing up on Friday, and people leave for lunch, and we go out for lunch. I just love the crispest shower kameez I can get, the best makes, and I'm so proud to sort of be part of their world. And they're praying 5 times a day in the lab. I mean, they leave meetings, and we're always conscious of that, because someone's cell phone starts to read a call for prayer. There's apps to tell you when to go and pray. And we're very, and it's cool. It breaks up the day into manageable blocks. And when they come back, they're really grounded. So, man, something's working for them. And every engineer that works for our lab in Islamabad supports maybe 50 people. So the multiplier factor is huge. It supports their immediate household, and that money, that good salary, just has a massive percolation effect. But outside is this bizarre combination of this modern capital city, which is subject to massive bombings, not that many recently, but the Marriott Hotel, which is kitty corner from our office, was blown, the whole front was blown off by a truck bomb that killed, 100 people, and it left a 30-foot crater and blew the windows out of the back of our lab about 3-4 years ago. That's a reality. So you're in this strange world of Starbucks and cafe life, Twitter Muslims doing their thing, a ultra-corrupt government that is like draining, corrupt officials and etc. US B-52s, roaring, and they're not doing too much roaring these days, but this whole trippy thing, universities under construction, a booming sector in education, power outages every single hour in the capital city, and generator plants, the rich people's houses have generators that just kick on. Cricket in the weekends with the guys with the fully automatic weapons that are in the front of every house, who have a nice smile. If you smile at any of these guys, they've got AK-47s, great big huge, I don't know what even these things are, they're huge double barrel shotgun things. They'll all crack a grin to you. And in the weekends, their guns are in their guard huts and they're playing cricket and everybody's out there. Or we're bringing food out to them because the guys all night, and they're guarding rich people or ambassadors or whatnot houses. And you can play tennis on actual clay tennis courts, the finest of the old British Empire, where sweepers and guys that really know what they're doing make the perfect clay tennis court. If you want anything done with shoes, Pakistan is a rockin' place. They know leather. They know how. They have skills that the rest of the world has lost. They can make brocade. So the royal family, brocade is this really elaborate kind of sewn garment stuff. They make it in Pakistan for the royal family because there are no tailors left in the UK, effectively. So it's a trippy world. And what we do there also, and at 6 o'clock I may tell you a story about going to the northwest area, to the Pashtun area. But we drive, we get in the van, and we bump along on this highway called the Grand Trunk Road up into the pure Pashtun area, where you reach a sign that says Peshawar and Kabul this way to go to Afghanistan, or Tarbela this way. And you're in the zone. You're in the zone of the drones. But if you stopped at any, if your car broke down, I'll tell you another thing. This is Pakistan. It's a country under, it's a pariah state, right? It's like, why would you go there? But there are wonders there. For example, I observed what I think is the most efficient economy in the world in automobile repair. So you're on the Grand Trunk Road, and the trucks next to you are covered with psychedelic paintings, enamel works, hanging jewels. These guys, these are their life works, these cars, these trucks. They're old Bedford trucks. They sleep up above the cab. They have these curving fronts. They're phenomenal. And I found out they're chick magnets. So these guys impress the girls with the beautiful coloration of these damn trucks. But the trucks are all built in the 50s. Bedford trucks from the British Empire. If one is broken down, there are these enormous sort of circular compounds where you have little concrete repair houses. If you pulled in with your car choking into one of these places, guess what happens? A guy runs out, puts a parasol up to shade you. Somebody else, a kid brings a table, tea comes out from the Pashtun guy. You're sitting there. They're asking, what is the problem? The truck is not starting, or it's coughing or whatever. there's runners that go between these hole in the wall places, and within I guarantee you the shortest time humanly possible, they've identified the problem. They have all the experts there. They've rushed apart. They've taken care of you as a guest, and you're back on the road. And this is Pakistan. And I said, do you ever take cars to dealers? And people said, no, you'd never do that. You'd be crazy to take it to it. That's a whole Western thing. They're going to stiff you. These are the honest people. And we have invented our own system that is beautiful and it works. And so if you did your PhD on this, I mean, you'd find, so-called third world countries, you look at these places and they look like they're disaster areas. But underneath is the beating heart of a tremendously capable community. But it looks like a disaster area from outside. So going to Pakistan, it's a huge thing. So when I'm immune to the news. I'm immune to the fear-mongering and the this and the that we get about most of those countries, because I've gone there, I've put on the garb, I've been in the place, and I've shut my mouth up and listened. And so that's part of this shamanism. So other zones that I go to some of our software is used to run the entire retail Swiss banking system. So you're sitting with Swiss bankers. And they're a whole other mentality. They're a bizarre people. The Swiss have a strange humor that it's almost impossible to figure out. The Swiss are weird. They're truly weird. Germans are figurable, outable, but the Swiss there's some kind of sophistication to this. You can see why Albert Hofmann was a Basel Swiss chemist. Now the Swiss would even describe a Swiss chemist as the most anal retentive personality imaginable. And yet, because Albert Hofmann is Swiss, there's a humor to him and an irony he's able to hold that would allow him to come up with this compound, explore it, find out that it has a bizarre effect, and the whole world gets turned on. But for him, it's okay. He's Swiss. He can deal with this kind of completely bizarre consequences, because in some sense the Swiss have spent 1,000 years trying to stay out of the way of the external world and have their own little federation. And they have 4 languages. And anyway, so Switzerland, another place. Burning Man culture. We think we know what this is all about. But after a while, if you're going between these communities, my Christian friends, my right-wing Christian friends, I tell you, they have found gold, alchemical gold. I mean, the ones that have, they've found what they call Jesus Christ, and when they do that, they have this huge rush that comes in that is so powerful. I say that it's as powerful as anything you would do with psychedelics. Something overwhelms these people, and it's a super powerful energy source they attach into. They may get in trouble with it later, but don't we get in trouble when we tap into energy sources? So all these communities, the bankers, there's a rush. Nerds have a tech rush for things. So everybody, in a sense, is looking for their alchemical gold, and they find it, the Christian neocons find it one place, the Twitter Muslims in high tech in Pakistan find it another place. The NASA engineers find it after very arduous hazing exercise that they find it in another place. And we're out here trying to figure it out too. But I think all these communities have this common property. And to put yourself on the shelf, and after a while you can start doing another trick. And it's very, very subtle, and you should never tell anybody you're doing this. If you get to know somebody pretty well, you can open yourself such that you can invite into yourself, and this has only happened to me a few times, where you get a flash inside yourself where you feel that other person, and it's an opening where you become them. You simulate them for an instant. It's hard for me to maintain it, but you get an insight, a flash insight. You are that person for an instant. And suddenly you're seeing the world through their eyes, and then it falls away because your own structures are pretty strong about, it's almost like, you have antigens against that. So you have to kind of make the systems allow that form. But you get this rush too. That's some of the biggest rushes I've ever gotten, is feeling like I was that other person just for an instant. And then you have an incredible softening. You have a deep insight into that person. They don't know that you pulled this trick off, but suddenly a wall comes down. And instead of a person, sometimes you just have chemistry with people and you just go. Other times there's like an instant wall, an instant disconnect. This kind of somatic simulation of that other person can actually break down that wall because you partially become them. So then you become interlockable. Your system becomes compatible with their interfaces because you're partially them for an instant. You have just enough insight to get over that hump and get into their space, and they suddenly think, wow, I really like talking to this person. I didn't like them initially, and now we're having a good old time. And the more you can do this, Genghis Khan, it's interesting, my wife Galen's a lot like this, and her former bandmate used to say, you could have a deep all-night conversation with Genghis Khan, or Pol Pot. She's like that too. She's a very deep empath. I mean, there is no one that she can't connect to. It's harder, I think, for males. But having developed this skill also means you have absolutely to suspend all judgment. You must suspend all judgment and accept everything as equal value. Because what you're trying to do is not determine whether the Christian right is doing evil in the world or government are bad or everything. You're just trying to fully represent and feel and see their worldviews. That's the highest value. Then, after that, after you've done all that, you can move freely between these communities. Like you're now, you've got a kind of a club card for different communities. And if the world's ever to figure out how to work better, it's going to be these kind of intermediators, these kind of people who move between these communities who, like for instance, in the banking system, our software is used by a lot of these big banks, and here we're about to burn Wall Street and all that stuff, and I'll cheer and scream and everything too, like everybody else. But truthfully, most of the people in the banking system didn't create a conspiracy to create the disaster. It was everybody got into the rush of the bubble, and in making these instruments, and just a madness overtook them, and of course there was no adult supervision. So the banking system blew itself up. And there's people who love bubbles. There's people who prepare for the bursting of bubbles and bet their whole careers on them. So there's a bubble-loving community. And of course they do this. They do quite a bit of damage. But they if you get into that mindset, there's a guy who predicted the property market crash. I predicted it in a Pentagon seminar in 2003. We were talking about the consequences of the Iraq invasion, which was 3 months away, we thought. And I almost got into a fist fight with a guy from the Army War College, which is ironic because the Army War College is a bastion of liberalism in the military, but this guy was so black opsy. He was so offensive to the Muslims in our team. These are Muslim academics who are experts in the region. This guy was saying like, well, we should just bomb all the region back to the 7th century where they belong and blah, blah, blah. And I said, you know what, Tom? If I could put this is not classified. This is a public event. I could just blog this. There were no blogs then, but I could put this online and you'd be in trouble. Do you really want to go on record as saying this? And the Muslim lady came up to me later and she said, thank you. These black ops, gung-ho people are just terrible. We have to keep our mouths shut, but they're so offensive, they're so scary, and we don't know what to do. And in the post 9/11 period, these Muslims working hard in the government were under a huge discrimination and attack by their colleagues, and they were unable to say a thing. And I said, you know what, we're all here to work on a bigger problem. That seminar was to work on a challenge, which is to how to get the U.S. onto sustainable energy instead of petroleum, importing and burning up petroleum. A serious workshop started and supported by Andrew Marshall. And you won't find anything about Andrew Marshall on the internet. This guy started in like forebrain thinking about the whole world history in the United States in 1948. He ran the Rand Corporation in Santa Monica, which is the kind of big think tank of the West Coast. Then in '68, Richard Nixon appointed him to a major office called Net Assessment, which looks forward 50 years. Everyone calls Andy Marshall for advice before doing anything. So at the time that he sponsored this workshop, he had gone in front of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is all the generals in the war room, and said, this Iraq thing is terrible. This is a disaster. And they all listened because this guy was he is the forebrain of the Pentagon. He has the institutional knowledge, and he has the balls to say anything. And at the time, he was 85 years old. He may be passed away by now. I'm not sure. Again, no information on Andrew Marshall. And of course, the Joint Chiefs said, we don't have a vote. We know this is a mess and a disaster. We don't have a vote in whether this thing goes ahead or not. We've got an out-of-control executive branch. So Andrew Marshall is one of these, he's a shaman. He goes very quiet between communities. And what he decided to do, get this, how ballsy this is. He goes out to North and South Dakota, and he meets with tribal elders. They bring Andy, and they bring a bunch of Pentagon senior planners, a couple of generals. Now this is like, what was it, Little Bighorn country. You know, there wasn't a good encounter the last time between those tribes and the U.S. Army, right? Well, it turns out that the chemistry worked, and Andy knew it would. They sat down with the elders, and they said, let's talk long term. Let's talk 500 years. What is going to be the best for this continent, for the health of this land? And guess what they figured out? That the elders had already been thinking of giant wind farms on their reservation. And the elders had kind of done back-of-the-envelope calculations. So what did Andy do? He funded them $30 million in a study to be done to figure this out. It turns out that these elders in the Lakota, I think it was the Lakota and a couple of other nations, had figured out we're a sovereign land. So all the barriers that happen to putting up giant wind farms elsewhere are not going to apply to us. We can probably go ahead with this. We can become, they call it the Gulf, like the Middle East of wind for North America. The wind just roars through that part of the country on a pretty continuous basis. There's a wind belt. And they figured that they did the calculation, 100,000 high-capacity turbines on the res, not even anywhere off the reservation, and they're generating 1/3 of the electric power needs of the United States from the res. And one of the discussions was, do we want to do gambling, or do we want to become a very powerful influence in this country and help preserve this land? So Andy said, here's $30 million, and the study started and was underway. Now the problem, of course, that they had is that the transmission system is owned by the coal lobby, and there you have the corruption. So what one of the elders said, and this gives you an idea of how hip people can be when they actually meet across boundaries. One of the elders said, we'll build our own fucking transmission system, and we'll use semiconductor, low loss, the latest tech, because the old transmission system is for crap anyway, and we will take this thing on. I'm not sure where this has gone, but this is an example of the shamanic traveling between communities fearlessly as a listener. And it was mainly that the military people who arrived that day on the reservation just sat and they listened. They listened for 2 or 3 days before they said anything, and then finally, and the elders respected that. And they determined at the end, we're both long-term thinkers. We care about our kids and the generations down. And the military people did too. We care about that. We got a fixed salary base. It's not about, we like to gain in rank, but our salaries are public. We're just kind of people in a system. And so we think long-term preservation of the system. And we worry about our political branch sending us off into disasters. So next time you think about the military, especially the higher up, I tell you, I would say 70% of the people I've met high up in the military, I'd prefer them any time over a political creatures that we get. They are much more solid individuals. So shamanic travel between these worlds. So does anyone have a comment or question on this kind of? I can tell you way more stories, but I want to give everybody a bit of a breather, including me. Question up front.
I was curious about your background and how you got to work in the Pentagon and NASA and what you did for a living to put yourself in that situation.
The question is, how did I be able to put myself in this position? And that's an interesting question. I guess because I kind of made a life plan, and there was no one there to tell me otherwise. And a lot of these things were sort of foolish. I mean, how can you expect to get into these worlds? You know, you think you can't. No one was telling me you must to take over the family business. You must get a law degree. You must do X and Y and Q. It was like I was on my own. I was an immigrant from Canada. I was an immigrant in Czechoslovakia for a while. I had to make my own way. I had $2,000 in my pocket going to graduate school here. I had no one in the United States. I didn't know. All my Canadian friends said, "You're crazy going to the U.S. It's a crazy place." I said, "That's exactly why I'm going to the U.S. It's a crazy zone because it's open possibilities." So I had a dream as a kid that I might do something with NASA, and I did stuff in between. I did virtual worlds work, and then one day I got invited to present a virtual world reconstruction of the moon landings that we did with agents and stuff. And we just happened to have a senior scientist in the audience who, at that very moment, said, "This is a career maker for me and my group." And he arranged the first funding, and 25 grants later, 10 years later, we had built 25 projects for NASA. It was just phenomenal. And then what I did within NASA was using the shamanic practice of moving between the NASA centers, listening and keeping my freaking mouth shut and not making statements that I would be considered flaky, because I watched people fall on the sword of flakiness where nobody would talk to them after that. And it's like, really be careful. Make someone else look good, not you, because we were servicing all these groups. So there's a whole strategy to penetrate NASA. And penetrate it we did. At one point, this was the greatest project I was ever involved in. A guy that was a friend of mine that I just met casually got put in charge in 2007 of figuring out if NASA could go to somewhere else but the moon. And they picked asteroids. And this was very controversial because at the time George W. Bush had go back to the moon, and everybody's on board with that. And of course there's no funding, so it was a disaster. And so this group that involved all these people who cared about going out to see asteroids for a lot of reasons, because it's deep space, it's part of the way to Mars. It's a real new mission. It goes back to the heart of the birth of the solar system. What if an asteroid's coming toward us? It'd be good to have the capability of actually sending heavy spacecraft out there and doing all that. It's for Earth protection. Really good idea. So these people were in an underground. There was a Mars underground in the 80s. In the 2000s, there was this NEO underground, near Earth object underground. So this guy called me up one day and said, "We've done a whole design study for the administrator in Washington on how to send a heavy human spacecraft to a near Earth object, 100 to 500 meters in length. That would be a 6-week journey out, and we would either, they didn't know what to do when they got there. They were going to try to just do imaging, and they hadn't thought about docking. You can't land on an asteroid. The gravity's too low. You have to attach yourself. It's like the problem insects have. Insects don't have the problem of flying. They have the problem of not flying. They're getting blown off of surfaces all the time, because the air is such a dominant force in their lives. They have to develop techniques to hold on to walls, and they have all these hooks and all that stuff. So I knew that. So I said to Rob, is anybody working on the problems of docking a spacecraft, a 50-ton or 30-ton spacecraft, with people aboard, with jets firing, with robotic arms, to connect to this asteroid surface? And he said, no, that's too much imagination. We can't do that as civil servants, because we would have to get really flowery and do all this stuff that is way beyond our envelope of what we've been asked to do. And I said, did you ask anybody else? He said, well, we asked this other team, and they were going to charge us a humongous amount of money. And what could you at least try to visualize this so we can put it in the report and communicate it? And I said, sure. And we'll do it for free. And so he came over to my house, and we sat and drew this thing out in about a half an hour. He took it back to Johnson Space Center. They said, looks plausible. And the way I did that was we had already modeled all the missions NASA did. I knew about airbags. I knew about holding stuff down. I knew about operations with astronauts. I knew about teleoperations of reaching out with a robot arm, all this stuff. And I went to our team and said, it's a freebie project. Just go as fast as you can. We need to have this totally worked up. And then I asked Rob, I said, has NASA ever done anything like this? No. He said, no, this will be the first design of taking humans to another body in the solar system since Wernher von Braun designed the lunar lander in 1962 and the whole strategy. And I said, good on you, And this is not Bruce Willis. This is not Deep Impact. This is not fakery. This is a real thing. And so that was the high point of my entire time. I got to do it. Now, the tricky thing was it had to be embargoed, because if the information had come out, people's careers would have been in jeopardy. So the way we did it was this backdoor thing. General Pete Warden at NASA Ames was a 2-star general who was fired over his comments from the Iraq War. See how these things get connected? He became the head of NASA Ames, and he was a renegade. He used to run Space Command, for God's sake. So he cared about asteroids a lot. And I went to see him at his office and I said, Pete, here's this design we've worked up. It's really powerful. If we put this out to the public, it'll change the whole dialogue on the future of space exploration, get us out of this moon craziness. And he said, you know what? We can't put it out. But you're not a civil servant. You're outside. So what we'll do is you put it out. And we'll go through our public affairs officer. We'll do it as this sort of backdoor thing. So I had to arrange this whole thing with CNN, with Space.com, with Popular Science, with our own sites, that we had a launch date of July 31st. And it was interesting because the Public Affairs Office in Washington got wind of this, and it was even set up to the point where our press release had been reviewed by all the senior scientists inside, so they knew that it wouldn't bounce. The PAO has a huge amount of power because they keep political appointees from getting in trouble. So the PAO got blindsided, and the administrator got told by their own public affairs office that they needed to protect him from the results of this study, and he came down with a sledgehammer on them saying, I commissioned this study. So then it went out, and I did, and this is the most fun thing you can imagine. The place that we premiered this was at Industrial Light and Magic in the big theater in San Francisco, where they make the films. They make Star Wars films and everything. And as I was walking in, it was a presentation for ILM animators. They're interested in space and stuff because we had real-time animation of the spacecraft contacting guys going out and everything. And as I walked down the hallway, I looked, and there was Darth Vader in the glass case. And I went out of the building before I went, and I said, Pete, because Pete was called Darth Vader as the head of Space Command. You won't believe this, but your namesake is standing right here, Darth Vader. And so we did that, and then we did a public talk, and he came in with his own PAO in tow. And basically she was watching me to see if I would make any mistake that might jeopardize his career. And yet the next day we had 10 billion hits. It was the top of AOL. It was on the cover of these magazines. And I was in a restaurant in Sunnyvale, and I was just peeing. And this little kid came in. This was about 2 days later. And he turned to me, and I don't know why, and he said, NASA's going to go to an asteroid. I said, this is great. And we changed the discourse. And 3 years later, NASA adopted that as their next deep space target. But the ins and outs, these are not, what this is really saying is that an organization like NASA, like the World Bank, like the incredibly ineffective U.S. Congress. All these organizations are full of individuals. They're not full of a cabal. There's no dominator culture. I'm sorry, Terrence. What Terrence used to describe a lot of the conspiracy theories that he was presented, including UFO theories, used to call them cartoon epistemologies. That they were so simplified as to be palatable, be highly palatable, but they're actually not true. They don't really represent what goes on. And in this community, we fall victim to this all the time. Is it because psychedelics give us, powerful and potentially delusional insights? Is it because we feel we're outsiders and therefore we don't go on these journeys and find out and deeply ingrain ourselves into these communities, that we are then a victim of our own delusions? But then, you'll see speakers that come up with the same tired conspiracy theory about the world's going to end because, these evil agencies are setting up universal surveillance and blah, blah, blah. Yes, they are setting up surveillance, but I have a friend who worked for Homeland Security, and for the first 4 years, they had no functional email system. It was so fraught with problems with the contractors and just total fuck-ups and mismanagement that it's a good thing nobody was actually planning any attacks against this country, because I don't think they would have been able to do anything about it, because they set up a super agency that had a huge block of funding, but it was chewed up by all these other agencies that had interests in it. It's almost like if you were to set up a really good watchdog that was really low key and everything, the Homeland Security would be the exact wrong way to do it. And that's just the way that bureaucracy everyone jumped on the bandwagon, they get a piece of that pie, all looked good on paper, and so they made this thing that was hugely inefficient, and ineffective. But on the other side, the organization that launched the attack was also similar. I'll tell you a story about that. So, did you know that the entire kerfuffle of the last 10 years, I call it, a comedy of errors through PowerPoint. Comedy of errors through PowerPoint. So, at our summit in Arlington, Washington, our workshop, one of the questions I asked was, you guys have come fresh out of the meetings where the executive branch is making the case for going into Iraq. What were you presented? Oh, a PowerPoint with 7 bullet points. And it was kind of being rammed down. These were the 7 bullet points in this order of why we're doing it. And some of them were a little bit delusional. Some of them were like economic interests, and some of them were like just sort of nonsensical ideological things. A couple of them were practical, but these bullet points we're getting with the program. Global, groupthink, PowerPoint. Did you know that there was in the initial invasion in Afghanistan, U.S. troops went into Kandahar, but a journalist was with them, and he went into an office. It was just an abandoned office. He found a bunch of laptops. He took one back to where he was staying and booted it up. It was a Al-Qaeda laptop with PowerPoints in it. And there was a PowerPoint which had bullet points, in Arabic about what is our plan. Stage 1, attack the United States. No, stage 1 was this, and then attack the United States, and then they will invade a Muslim land, and then they will create mayhem, etc. And then they had this whole thing planned by PowerPoint. And what happened, both were led into disaster. And the groupthink. And Al-Qaeda was decimated by this. I mean, and they decimated their host country, and they decimated people. They created so much damage, and ultimately the loss of Muslim lives in huge, enormous scale. So that's another way of looking at this. And these were both sort of fumbling organizations, one big and one small, but one competent at doing one thing, which is the attack on the World Trade Center. The other one, the United States, competent at some things, but mostly incompetent at most things. And so these things go at each other. And the United States didn't even go and address Al-Qaeda. They went to the wrong place. One of the bullets in one of the later PowerPoints was, in the Al-Qaeda PowerPoints was, we are just thrilled to the moon that the United States is thinking of going into Iraq because that provides us fodder for our plans. It's even better. Why are these fools doing it? Because they're stupid. And by going into Iraq, this delusional plan of Al Qaeda was, wow, they're not just going to come here to Afghanistan and really damage our host country. They're going to go into Iraq too, which means there will be mayhem across a wide belt. And their feeling was the U.S. would lose in those countries, be driven back like Vietnam. There would be an insurgency just like Ho Chi Minh. And then there would be ability to do basically a true sort of jihadist populist drive. Everybody thought of Khomeini and how Khomeini built this network around the world through cassette tapes. And when the Shah was falling, they came and they had all these people on board and they were able to roll into Tehran and sort of push the whole thing over. And this was Al Qaeda's dream. And their target was Saudi Arabia. Their prime target was Saudi Arabia because bin Laden had been basically thrown out of the country, and he's a Saudi family. It was a wealthy family into construction. By the way, they were shocked that World Trade Center came down. They were shocked, but, and it's interesting, there isn't much known about this, but I bet you bin Laden thought this through, because he's an engineer. He was an engineer in construction, a whole company. And he was probably thinking, how did these buildings come down? And, actually, if you do the research, it was tube steel construction for lightweight. It was very advanced technology in 1971. And a bunch of other things, that the pumps weren't able to get water to both buildings, and there was a whole bunch of other factors. I don't believe in any of the conspiracy theories on that one. I mean, there's so much evidence about, and there's this shock about them coming down, and there's interviewed the guy who was the mastermind, and there's just too much evidence. Who knows about that other building? I have no idea. I haven't even looked at it. But where am I going with this? So I think you can kind of lose your illusions and your fears about the great big daddy, the great big force that is going to surveil, is going to know that these organizations are very ineffective. They're fragile also. They're subject to opinion. The Soviet Union, if you roll back the clock, the old Soviet Union, for a period of time, was able to effect total informational freeze out on a huge landmass. A friend of mine set up the first global telephone company in the USSR after Gorbachev was liberalizing. And he told me, I said, well, how many phone lines go out of the USSR? It was like 64. 64 phone lines. That's all they had. How can a country even operate? And he was funded by George Soros, because George Soros was in Moscow trying to desperately make a phone call to his wife. He couldn't, because he couldn't get a connection, because he needed paperwork and probably apparatchiks and all this. And he found Joel with a Mac SE, able to send email. And Joel didn't know who he was, this billionaire, and this guy funded Joel to set up global telesystems. So the Soviet Union was able to do this, but I don't think anywhere, the world is now so full of chaos and information flowing that the time of total tyrannical control from the top down, I think, is fading into the rearview mirror. And we are at a time, as Terence McKenna said, where nobody is in control. He would say, the more horrifying truth is no one is in control. But that's an opportunity. And that should allow you to either lose sleep at night or sleep better at night. But I think what you have to do is, when there's a speaker, including me, who makes a claim, there's a very strong claim, you can feel it in your gut. They say something, it sounds a little conspiracy, or it's a very hard claim, it's a claim that demonizes a population or group or identifies an enemy. That's a strong claim. And in science, there's this saying, strong claims require even stronger evidence. And what I would, say that you should do, just so you don't fall into the spell of these things, is question, the back. And I think if we have a healthy future civilization, we will always do this. Somebody makes this audacious claim or statement to the public, they immediately go into a bit bucket where they're now under scrutiny. there was a guy that called me up who had this theory about a face on Mars based on fuzzy photographs of this rock outcropping. And I remember, like, he was trying to get to speak at one of our space conferences, and I said, I don't know. I didn't want to say flaky, but I was doing the NASA thing of just politely deflecting and whatever, because the flake flag was already flying. And then he was on Art Bell. And I remember being on and this is a national radio program called Coast to Coast. I remember I was supposed to be on with Art talking about avatars in 97 or 98. And I called him up he said, put on the all-night coffee and, we're going till dawn. Do you have the stamina to talk all night? And I do, which is something you should have dread terror about, sitting right here. But Art said, wait a minute. And he's on his slow modem connection to his house trailer in Pahrump, Nevada, in the middle of the desert. He said, oh boy, we're going to have to do a different show. I'm sorry, but the face on Mars scam has been revealed. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, take a look at this link. And there was a nice high-res photo of rock outcroppings and stuff like that. And so I said, what are you going to do, Art? He said, I'm going to have him back on the show, and we're take him down. I said, Art, you get them on the way up, and you interview them as though they held God's truth or they have the secrets of the universe in this face on Mars thing. Then when it breaks, you take them down. He says, you get them going, you get them coming. It's airtime. Now, it's sort of like, that's how this works. Then what happened to Art? So he had a career of doing this, giving these people airtime. But guess what happened to Art? Art got his comeuppance. He had a guy on the show. This was only about 6 months later than this whole face on Mars thing. By the way, this guy went on to propose that he sees a civilization on the moon. At that point, this guy should actually not be able to get any airtime anywhere. His flake flag is flying, and sorry, we don't believe you anymore. These guys actually should be just they should have a little online system where people just say, this guy, just don't believe him. He shouldn't be able to find a sucker the next time. But what happened to Art Bell was very serious 6 months later. It was no laughing matter. There was a guy who claimed that there was a spacecraft in the tail of this comet coming in. I can't remember the name of the comet. Was it? What was it? Hale-Bopp. Yeah, in fact, I saw it from a flight over Greenland. It was really cool from the airplane. He claimed there's a spacecraft coming in. It was going to do something to the Earth, right? And, well, guess what? There were 39 people in some mansion in a bizarre situation, cultic circumstance in San Diego County were listening to this. Guess what? They all took poison Kool-Aid before this happened. They died. It was horrendous. It was horrific. These people were in this delusional capture by someone who then got delusionally captured by this crazy Art Bell show. It shook Art to the core. And Art, there was a period where Art was off the show, and he would always say, the air conditioner's broken. But this just rocked his world. And he finally had the guy back on the show. And then the guy admitted, well, I just made all this shit up. And what Art did, and the emotion in his voice, he said, then their blood is on your hands, sir, and it is on mine. Why do I give you people airtime? Why do I do this? And that started the end of Art's career and there's a new guy named George Norrie doing this, and they call this paranoid paranormal radio. But if even the people who are doing it have serious doubts about why they're giving these people airtime, we should too. They're sitting in front of them on a microphone. So you should question, always question. Don't take it as faith. And don't let yourself get panicked or under the spell of people who make these strong claims. Immediately, I would say, just like you were a NASA engineer, you become the skeptic and you tick that thing like, let's watch that person and see other claims they make. They may switch direction and make another strong claim and hold out their area which they have no background in. And you find out, is this person an expert in asteroids? Or they're claiming that an asteroid is going to impact the Earth, and next week they're claiming that all jars of milk will be poisoned. And are they an agricultural expert? So as they make these strong claims, and especially people who stack claims together, I think there's a guy who thinks that the whole world is run by lizard brain people or something. And these conspiracy theories they're breathtaking in scope and audacity. They're like the most, they make a claim that's tied to 30 other claims in the future, and each one of them lessens the probability down to a ridiculous level. And I think if we have a good, healthy mental civilization in the future, those people their presentations will be run on the comedy hour, because they do a lot of damage to society. Because it's not just kind of people who are making shit up like, Hale Bopp and stuff like that. People make shit up all the time and make these claims. In the Pentagon or the CIA, they were making up shit about Soviet power for years. It wasn't true. I had a friend who flew in the Blackbird, and it was a high altitude. No, she flew in the SR-71B Blackbird. And she proved that a lot of the bunkers and the facilities in the USSR were not even functional. And so there were all these people making these claims, and guess what? They spent $500 billion or $1 trillion of your future on bogus military spending. So across the board, we have to become better at people make a strong claim, take them to the mat for it. We need to return to kind of an objective, skeptical thinking, because you just don't want to fall under these spells and these kind of memes. They create a meme and it changes and it morphs like an idea in an ecosystem, and it bounces around and flows, and it morphs and it takes a life of its own, and then the original creator's not even around, and the bloody idea is still around, and it's causing problems everywhere you look. It's like a Pac-Man. You've got to sort of shoot these things down occasionally. So does that make any sense? So I think we can come to sanity if we can come to sanity, which is people who are slightly insane who are giving us all this stuff. We kind of identify they might be slightly nuts or have an agenda, and we should just kind of, if we all started doing this, these guys would just lose their airtime. And then we could have real discussions on what's going on in the world. We could actually get down through this mass of weirdness and actually get down to the core of, why the U.S. was attacked in September 11th and what we really should have done about it instead of what we did. Because that was a huge, costly mistake, because someone took control of the dialogue and drove it into a $2-3 trillion, 300,000 casualty war, and just devastation, and the early end to the United States hegemony. It was a huge cost. But it's only a few people who took control of that, and were never challenged. So I think we're running down to time for a couple of questions, or you can challenge me on this approach too. Is there any comments, questions? Where to begin? I think in your own life, if somebody tells you something that sounds really cool, but they're telling you and they don't, but it also scares you a little bit or whatever, think before you tell somebody else and pass on the meme. And think, how do they know this and how are they able to say this? And challenge them and say, and we don't do that because of political correctness, but we have to do this. This stuff is it's an epidemic. It's insane. And to tell you the truth, if the sanitary engineers, thank goodness, sanitary engineers are not subject to these conspiracy theories and memes, because suddenly city sewers would stop working. They're objectivists, right? They have a belief that the crocodiles are living in the sewer system, therefore you can't touch that line, or they get into delusional beliefs. Thank goodness they don't. Thank goodness airline pilots don't get into this. So there's a whole class of humanity that is very, very skeptical, and we got to protect them because they keep our world going. But we shouldn't waste our minds on this crap. We really shouldn't. There's too many far more interesting real things going on. One last example. We have time for one last. There was a fellow we met down at Arcosanti, who's a really cool archaeologist, and he was giving us this show of the pyramids in Egypt. Well, guess what? He had gone to Egypt in the 1970s, funded by some cult. I think it was Raelians or Pyramidians or something, that believed that the pyramids were built by UFOs. And he didn't have a PhD or anything. He was sort of sent there as some kind of collect evidence, and so we can build this media packages and somehow, we're talking about this. It's our big selling thing, but we don't even have pictures of the pyramids. So, go out and do this. This guy went out there and he got in touch with the reality of the pyramids and the challenge of how they were built. And he met the head of antiquities. And the guy took him out and said, we believe that under this sand here is the city of the people who built the pyramids because of some radar imaging or whatever. And this guy quit the rail-ins, or the pyramidians, went back to university, got a PhD in archaeology because he was so fascinated of being able a chance to actually answer the real question. And between the mid-70s and into the 90s, they excavated this huge area and they found the truth. And the truth about how the pyramids were made is stunning. It's absolutely stunning. No slaves were used. That was an invention sort of Hollywood. So they cut through all the crap. They found the technology that people of 5,000 years ago used to build these enormous structures. And it was like Burning Man. Do you know that the pyramid construction was like annual Burning Man festival? What would happen is the Nile Delta would get flooded, irrigation systems would go, everyone would do their thing, get the crops in, and then they just wait for stuff to grow. Young men and women had put in their application to compete to get into the project to go to this place to build pyramids. It was a major social deal. There were gangs, there were clubs. As they found, well, how do they know this? They found graffiti inside the pyramids that said, the drunken friends of Khufu has reached this point first. We won. Graffiti inside the pyramids of these people who are having a rocking good time. It was the great work of their lives. And the city next door was so organized. He showed us these slides of excavated streets. He says, here's the bakery. It made giant cone-shaped bread. The guys slung them on the backs and they ate when they're way up, 200 feet up, 300 feet up. That was what fed them. Here's a full-on clinic, hospital, probably the best in the ancient world. Here's, housing. Here's artisans. Here's stone cutters that made the stone cladding. And he said, here's a modern map of Cairo and the maze warren of streets and chaos. And here's the Giza Plateau artisan city. And it was so much better laid out and well thought through. It was a full, state enterprise. It was like a moon launch. So, here he went from a delusional thing, and he convinced himself that reality is far more interesting. And so just the stories about this, when you really question, sometimes you get alchemical gold, and you can, and that's the real value of questioning those that propose things that don't quite feel right. You might get through to the true alchemical gold.